The winding ribbon of asphalt, barely a suggestion of a road, finally frayed into a gravel track that clawed its way up the incline. Each jostle of the rented SUV, each spray of loose stone against the wheel wells, served only to deepen my irritation. This was not progress, this was a regression. Dean, urban planner, master of concrete grids and steel arteries, had been summarily ejected from his meticulously ordered existence and flung into this green, dripping maw of the Pacific Northwest. My inheritance, a supposed windfall, felt more like a sentence. The cabin appeared less like a dwelling and more like an argument with gravity. Its weathered planks, grayed to the color of forgotten ash, were obscured by a rampant tapestry of moss and climbing vines. Windows, opaque with grime and time, stared out like cataract eyes. A porch, sagging and splintered, offered no invitation. It was a ruin, pure and unadulterated, and my first thought was of the demolition crew I'd call once the papers were signed. My cynicism, usually a comforting shroud, felt particularly robust against this backdrop of decay. The key, a heavy, tarnished brass relic, turned with a groan that echoed the cabin's own weary resignation. A gust of air, thick with the scent of damp earth, mildew, and something else, a faint, metallic tang, like old blood or wet pennies, pushed past me. I stepped inside, my boots crunching on generations of dust and fallen plaster. The silence was not empty, it was a presence, thick and watchful. Here, the hum of the city, the distant drone of traffic, the constant murmur of human activity, were not merely absent. They were unthinkable. Sunlight, a pale, hesitant visitor, struggled through the grimy panes, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed on the warped floorboards. My breath plumed in the chill air. The interior was a mausoleum of forgotten lives, cobweb-draped furniture, shrouded in white sheets that billowed slightly as I moved, like ghosts holding their breath. I ran a hand over a wooden mantelpiece, pulling back a gritty film. This place wasn't just old, it felt ancient, burdened by an invisible weight that pressed down on the very air. A floorboard groaned under my weight, a sound too deliberate for simple settling. I paused, my senses reaching out, dismissing the impulse. Old houses made noises. That was their nature. Yet, a subtle shift in the quality of the stillness made the hairs prickle on my arms. The metallic tang in the air seemed to intensify, wrapping around me, clinging to my clothes. I moved through the cramped living space, cataloging the rot, estimating the cost of removal. My professional eye saw only logistics. But then, in a dusty, forgotten corner, tucked beneath a stack of brittle, yellowed newspapers, I found it, a small, leather-bound trunk. Inside, nestled amongst moth-eaten textiles, were several journals. I picked one up, my fingers brushing against the rough, dry paper. The handwriting inside was spidery and hurried, filling the pages with cramped, frantic loops. It began with mundane observations, typical for a rural inhabitant: weather, crops, visits from a local woodsman. But then the tone shifted. The lines grew shorter, more erratic. This wasn't just a record, it was a confession, or perhaps a warning. My eyes scanned a random page, catching a phrase about the trees taking more than just light. My urban planner's logic rebelled, but the cabin itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. For a fleeting, disorienting instant, the cabin's interior seemed to stretch and distort, its walls dissolving into the cavernous, empty space of a movie theater lobby with no showtimes, the air thick with stale popcorn and forgotten anticipation, before snapping back to the cramped reality of the decay around me. It was a trick of the light, I told myself, a momentary lapse of focus. But the journals in my hand felt suddenly heavier, their cryptic words no longer merely quaint, but profoundly ominous. The woods outside, visible through the grimy window, seemed to press closer. Their ancient, gnarled branches reaching, almost like grasping fingers. The gravel track, a jagged scar across the forest floor, finally coughed me out into a clearing. Before me, the cabin slumped, a hunched, gray thing, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from under a heavy brow of sagging eaves. It was worse than the photographs, more decrepit, more steeped in the damp rot of the Pacific Northwest. A cynical sigh escaped my lips, a puff of visible breath in the cool air. This was not a property, it was a tombstone for forgotten ambitions. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of mildew and something else, something subtly metallic, like old coins left to corrode. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light piercing the grimy panes. I set my bag down with a thud that echoed hollowly. The silence that followed was not empty, but pregnant, as if holding its breath. I walked through the small, cramped rooms, each step raising a puff of ancient dust. A door I could have sworn was ajar when I first entered now sat firmly closed, its latch snug. Had I closed it myself? The memory felt indistinct, like a dream fading upon waking. I found them tucked beneath a loose floorboard in the study, a stack of leather-bound journals, their pages brittle and yellowed. The scrawl inside was hurried, almost frantic. The entries spoke of a slow, insidious theft, not of possessions, but of self. Not with wind, but with 1,000 lost names. It takes the edges first, the forgotten memories, the faces of strangers. Then it comes for the anchors, the name of my mother, the color of my own eyes. I write this now, to remember. I am. The ink bled into the paper, as if the writer's hand had trembled violently. I tried to focus on the practicalities, the peeling wallpaper, the structural rot. But the cabin itself seemed to resist my attempts at objective assessment. A floorboard I had just stepped on, firm beneath my boot, now groaned with a distinct, unsettling give, as if a weight had settled upon it. The faint scent of pine needles, sharp and green, drifted through the closed window, an impossible fragrance. There were no pine trees this close to the cabin, only a dense, nameless tangle of broadleaf trees. Later, as dusk bled indigo into the sky, I found myself in the main living area. I swore I heard a faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump from the floor above, like a heavy, slow heartbeat. I called out, my voice swallowed by the vast quiet, but there was no reply. I ascended the creaking stairs, my hand gripping the splintered banister. The sound vanished the moment my foot touched the top step. The upstairs rooms were empty, thick with dust, just as I'd left them. My rational mind strained to find an explanation, settling wood, an animal in the walls. I descended, feeling a growing unease. I needed a distraction, something to ground me. I picked up another journal. The author, clearly losing grip, described the trees themselves as conduits, their roots delving deep into a primal, ancient consciousness. It is not a spirit, the entry declared, but the land itself, awakened. It hungers for what we are. It consumes identity, leaving only echoes. I saw the faces in the bark, not carved, but grown, shifting. I scoffed aloud, the sound brittle in the stillness. Faces in bark? A trick of the light, an overactive imagination. For a fleeting, disorienting second, the peeling wallpaper, the faded floral pattern, resolved into something else entirely. I was standing in a vast, echoing space, the air thick with the phantom scent of stale popcorn and disinfectant. Before me, rows of empty, plush seats stretched into an impossible gloom, and a large, blank screen loomed, reflecting nothing. My breath hitched. Then, with a blink, the cabin wall reasserted itself, the familiar decay replacing the impossible vision. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. My hands began to tremble. I squeezed my eyes shut, then opened them again, forcing myself to stare at the wall, at the solid, tangible reality of the cabin. But the image lingered, a ghostly afterimage behind my eyelids. Was I already losing my grip? The woods, the cabin, the journals, they were seeping into my mind, poisoning my perceptions. I was Dean, a cynical urban planner. I knew what was real. Didn't I? Resolved into a familiar knot of wood grain, but too large, too intricate, too watching. My breath hitched, a dry, ragged gasp. The walls wavered, losing their solid lines, softening like old photographs left in the rain. I blinked, hard, trying to reassert the familiar, the mundane, but the world was unraveling. My vision swam, a tide of green and brown washing over the faded wallpaper, swallowing the rough-hewn beams. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the floorboards, through my very bones, a sound that wasn't a sound but a feeling of vast, ancient roots churning beneath the earth. When I opened my eyes again, the cabin was gone. I stood in a cavernous space, the air heavy with the ghost of stale popcorn and a chemical sweetness that clung to the throat. This was a movie theater lobby with no showtimes. The concession stand was dark, its glass cases empty save for a few forgotten crumbs. It felt wrong, utterly wrong, to be here. No ticket booth attendant, no distant murmur of a film, just the yawning maw of the dark hallways leading to the screens. This wasn't a place I had walked into. This was a place I had woken up in. I stumbled towards a wall adorned with faded posters. The faces on them were indistinct, blurred as if by a perpetual fog, their titles lost to time or an insidious erasure. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the cool, slick surface, expecting paper, finding instead something akin to bark, rough and ridged beneath the sheen. The floral pattern of the cabin wallpaper, the intricate wood grain, it was all here, subtly woven into the texture of this impossible space. It wasn't words, not really, but a chorus of forgotten sounds, the clatter of loose change, the murmur of hushed conversations, the distant swell of orchestral scores, all blended into a single, droning hum. It pulled at the threads of my thoughts, tugging at the names of my parents, the face of a colleague, the layout of my old apartment. Each memory felt like a delicate leaf, plucked from a branch and offered to the unseen maw. I fought back, clenching my jaw, forcing myself to remember the feel of the cabin key in my hand, the rough texture of the journal pages. But even those concrete anchors felt distant, like echoes of someone else's life. It was the woods, I realized, not just a metaphor, but the very essence of it, consuming the light, the sound, the self. It was here to take not just my memories, but the very scaffolding of who I was. And I was walking the final steps. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth, but now laced with something else, a sweet, decaying aroma, like leaves left too long in stagnant water. It was the smell of consumption, of identity slowly dissolving into the loam. My own thoughts began to fray, slipping through my grasp like grains of sand. My name, Dean, felt less like a label and more like a suggestion, a faint impression left on a damp stone. I turned slowly, my gaze sweeping across the empty lobby, the silent concession stand, the blurred posters. I saw now that the emergency lights flickered not with electricity, but with a faint, greenish luminescence, like moss growing in a perpetually shaded grotto. And within that green glow, the patterns on the walls, the texture of the floor, the very air itself, all resolved into a single, vast, intricate tapestry of interlocking leaves, branches, and swirling wood grain. The eyes were a little too wide, the skin a little too pale, and a faint, almost imperceptible green tinge seemed to bloom beneath the surface, like new growth pushing through old bark. It was not my voice, but a chorus of voices, ancient and new, all speaking in unison. Welcome. You are home. The last memory to slip away was the sound of my own scoff, brittle in the stillness of the cabin. It was replaced by a profound, pervasive calm, a quiet understanding that settled deep within me, like roots finding purchase in fertile soil. There was no more fight, no more struggle. Only the gentle hum of the woods, now a part of me, and I, a part of it. The movie theater lobby with no showtimes was vast, endless, and utterly quiet. And I was finally, utterly, still.